with that last name, Elsasser, Elsasser, for years I would introduce myself, George Elsasser, and everybody thought, my last name must have been Sasser, and I was one of these pompous guys who introduced himself with his middle initial, like George S. Pat or somebody. So anyway, that's why I'm in the habit of spelling my last name. I'm with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. I am not Eric Olson, whose name is on here, right? Eric is my boss. He's the elected Commonwealth's Attorney. He's a constitutional officer. The office stands for election every 4 years. Thank you. And I am one of 2 deputies in the office. I've been there about 15 years, 16, almost 17 years now. And Eric has been with the office for, I don't know, I think it's probably 30 years now. He started as a prosecutor, and back when he started, there were only 4 prosecutors in the office. Now we have 13, him and 12 underneath him. Who are we? What do we do? We are the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. If anybody's curious, if you don't know where we're located, we're in the building right back there. You got the courthouse over there. We get this building here. There's a newer building right over there, and that's the Chichester building, and that's where our office is. We're up on the 2nd floor. We take up the whole 2nd floor. The 1st floor is taken up by juvenile court services unit, and we have about a quarter of the 1st floor where our victim witness office is. Victim witness, it's a huge part of what our office does. They're kind of like a quasi-independent organization. They come underneath us. Marilyn Dufrat is D-U-F-R-A-T, Marilyn Dufrat. She is the victim witness coordinator for Stafford County. She has a staff of 5 victim witness assistants who work with her, and they're a vital part of what we do because they interface with victims in the community when, witnesses a lot of times as well, coordinating their appearance in court or if they need help. But their primary role and where they provide the lion's share of their effort is with victims when they need assistance, particularly when we have victims of violent crimes, victims of DUIs, things like that. You might have heard some things. We have a courthouse dog by the name of Khan. Everybody loves Khan. Khan's been in the newspaper. Khan's this great black lab, and he's just phenomenally trained. And I'm sorry, I have to use the microphone. Okay.
You need to use the microphone to use it.
Okay.
If you don't want your questions recorded, let me know. But we are going to record.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, how will I know? Is it okay? Is it coming through if I just hold it down here? Okay. All right. Technology, right? The technological tail wagging the operational dog, right? Okay. Anyway, so where was I? The dog, yes, Khan, incredible dog. He goes through a couple of years of training and just does a phenomenal job. Hopefully none of you fine people will ever need Khan's services because you're a victim or a very troubled witness. But if you're ever in the courthouse and you see this dog walking around, that's Khan. Stop and say hi to him. He's a very friendly animal. I'm accused of ruining him because every time he comes to my office, I always have snacks for him. So I'm always getting yelled at because I'm a dog guy, and I love to give Khan snacks. But he's a great dog, does a great job for us. We, as I said, we are the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. We are the prosecutors here in Stafford County. We don't do civil law. That's the county attorney's office, okay? County attorney works for the Board of Supervisors, and I guess his immediate boss would be the county administrator, all right? They provide in-house legal advice to the Board of Supervisors. They provide in-house legal advice to the county administrators. They deal with things like zoning. They're being sued for something. Any kind of issue that's non-criminal in nature, they would be the ones that handle that. We handle the criminal prosecution. So when somebody's charged with a crime, anything from a traffic violation all the way up to a murder case and everything in between. That's what our office does. It's a little bit of an odd title. It's Commonwealth's Attorney, and it confuses people, and that's because we're a Commonwealth, right? So I always tell people, you probably the more common term would be district attorney. Everybody knows what a district attorney is, right? You know, watch Law and Order and shows like that. So essentially, we're district attorneys, but we're Commonwealth of Virginia, so we're Commonwealth's attorneys. We have, as I said, we have Eric, and then there's 12 of us prosecutors in the office. In addition to him, he still prosecutes cases. He's in court, not as much as he used to be, but he's in court every week with cases he's handling himself. Most of the rest of us are in court pretty much every day. It's a rare week where one of us is not, each of us is not in court handling some cases right here in the courthouse. We have a caseload at any given time of about 500 felony cases. I just checked our figures tonight. I go in every month and I see what we're doing, make sure I'm keeping the cases balanced amongst all our prosecutors, looking at both just the numbers of cases that each of us are carrying, but also kind of the quality of the cases. So, you know, obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of cases that we prosecute don't take a whole heck of a lot of effort to do or a lot of expertise. If it's a basic shoplifting class, for example, from one of our retail stores, as opposed to a very involved robbery or a serious violent crime or a Dui Manslaughter or something like that. So I assign cases, so I'm always looking to balance, and we try to make sure we put our experienced attorneys, you know, we have them using their time on cases that really require their background, their years of experience to be able to do those cases well. And we just try to keep a mix, and we always keep an eye on training our newer attorneys, teaming them up with more experienced attorneys on our bigger cases. So everybody gets trained, and so the next generation can keep up with the caseload as things progress. When I started here in 2002, early 2002, the office was about half the size it is now, and the caseload was probably about half of what it is now. The county has experienced significant growth, and with that, the caseload has significantly increased. You know, our sheriff's department has about twice the number of deputies now that it used to have, and they probably are still manned at only about half of where they probably need to be. Not speaking for the sheriff, but I can tell you, those men and women who are out on the road, keeping the community safe, investigating crimes, they are stretched thin. They really are, and they do a fabulous job. It's a great department to be able to work with. And but boy, they could use more resources as well, you know. So what kind of crimes do we have mostly here in the county? Well, you know, our single biggest problem right now, and the one that has really hit home, is drugs, heroin, right? This is no surprise to anybody. I think everybody knows the problems we're having with heroin. Stafford County is suffering the heroin epidemic like every other community in this country is right now. It cuts across economic lines, racial lines. This drug, this heroin drug, is hitting every part of this community and to devastating effect. We are running probably, I don't know what our figures are right now. We actually have built a drug team of very experienced prosecutors. I have 3 full-time prosecutors. One of them is our chief deputy. She heads up the team. We have 2 other full-time, very experienced prosecutors, and then a couple of younger prosecutors who are being trained in the area of handling drug distribution cases. And it is, we've got probably each year, we're running at least 30 overdose deaths every year from heroin, okay? And those are just the deaths. You can maybe by a factor, I'd say, of probably at least 5 to count the number of overdoses we have. And I can't really even give you that good of a handle on it, and I'm sorry, I should have thought to ask the drug team what the overdose figures are looking like. But our fire and rescue crews and our deputies respond to a frighteningly large number of overdoses on a weekly basis. I mean, if you just look at the number of Narcan units they're going through, it's shocking. A Narcan unit, right, that's the drug to reverse the effects of the opiate. It unbinds the opiate from the receptors in the brain that are responding to those opiates. That's how the Narcan works, right? And in the old days, and when I say old days, I'm talking about just 3 years ago. That's the old days for the heroin epidemic. 3 years ago, the old days, fire rescue or the deputies would roll up on the scene of an overdose. It didn't happen that frequently, but when they did, they would take the nasal applicator with the Narcan, put it in the nostril, squeeze it, and that would be it. It would reverse the effects, and when it reverses the effects, it happens almost instantaneously, and the overdosing individual would be revived, and then fire rescue would take it from there and take them to the hospital. Nowadays, because of the power of the drugs we're dealing with, it is taking 3 and 4 doses of Narcan sometimes to save people. 3 or 4. That's how powerful the drugs are. And the reason we're having this problem is because it's no longer just heroin. The thing that's killing people is fentanyl. You've probably heard of fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It's made in the laboratory. Most of the fentanyl we're dealing with is coming from China. It's made in these Chinese labs. It's sold on the internet through the dark web. Anybody who wants to get a hold of it can figure it out pretty easily. The drug cartels are moving a lot of heroin through Mexico. They've been doing that for the last 18, 24 months. They've been using all those marijuana drug smuggling routes that the Mexican drug cartels had established and have had established for quite a few years. It's the same paths they're using for human smuggling and for marijuana smuggling. They're now in league with a lot of the opiate producers, so you get heroin being brought up, a lot of it through Mexico, and they're bringing in, and those drug cartels are now importing fentanyl, a lot of it from the Chinese labs and labs in other countries, but mostly in China. They're getting this fentanyl, and they're cutting the heroin with the fentanyl. Why? Because fentanyl even is so much cheaper than the heroin itself. The heroin itself is not that expensive for them to move it because they move it in such bulk, but the cost of the fentanyl is of only a fraction of the cost of the heroin. So what we're finding is heroin with a larger percentage of fentanyl as time goes on. So they're cutting it with more and more fentanyl, and what we're starting to see now are cases where there's no heroin at all, it's pure fentanyl. The heroin's coming in at such strength, even if they don't cut it, it's much stronger than the heroin. I grew up in the 60s and 70s in New York. We had heroin addicts up in New York in the 1960s, right? But they were guys who were hanging out in the park and had needles, and they were, it's like, nobody, they were a special class of people. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with them. Nobody wanted to be like them. We're seeing people come to their opiate addictions and wind up using heroin through a lot of different paths nowadays. And I'll touch on that in a moment. But the drug itself, the heroin itself, is so much more pure now, so much more powerful that the heroin itself is killing people, much more so than it did 30 and 40 years ago, right? Then on top of that, they're now cutting it with this incredibly powerful synthetic opioid of fentanyl. The fentanyl ranges, depending on what the actual chemical makeup of it is, because it's things they keep changing, these various analogs they use in the lab to create the actual fentanyl. Anywhere from, we've been trained 50 to 100 times stronger than the heroin itself. It has gotten so deadly that most police departments throughout the country now will no longer allow their drug detection dogs to sniff for drugs if there's any suspicion that it's heroin they're looking for, because we have dogs overdosing. You go to major urban environments with canine units, and they've got Narcan packs on the dogs, on the dogs' vests, police vests. So if they need to, because they've had to use Narcan to save the life of these animals, because they'll go and they'll sniff and they'll get it. Our law enforcement officers, they're no longer testing any white powder anymore. And we have field tests. All our law enforcement officers have these very accurate field tests. So you can field test a drug right there. So they stop somebody in a car, for example, a common scenario, find a white powder of some sort. You're talking to the people. It's pretty clear it's a drug, it's a narcotic. But they'll test, and in the old days they would test it right there on the hood of the car. If they get a positive result, then they know this individual's got a Schedule II drug, and then they arrest them. So the field test gave them gave the law enforcement a very valuable tool, so they weren't just arresting people just merely on the suspicion of the item that they had in the car was a dangerous drug, right? At least before we do that to somebody, we had some kind of basis, to do that, to take them to the magistrate and get the warrant. But they've had to stop doing that, because now you open up the package, that powder gets up in the air, the law enforcement officer inhales it, and depending on how much fentanyl's in there, he could be an overdose victim right there. You've probably seen stories in the media. Law enforcement officers, there was a very recent case, I forget where it was, maybe. Well, we had one in Stafford, yes. We had the case in Stafford, yes ma'am, thank you, I forgot about that. It was right here. There was a car, they were in the car, they were looking around, it was a police activity, and the residue got on the officer, and he wound up absorbing some of that dangerous drug through, and I'm trying to remember the details. I don't remember if he inhaled it or went through his skin. I think it went through his skin, right? Yeah. Touched it, and it got absorbed through his skin. That's how powerful it was. And fortunately for that deputy, he wound up going to the hospital as part of the police investigation, and it was while he was in the emergency room, because that's where the suspect was, that it was a very alert healthcare provider, I believe it was one of the ER nurses, saw him and said, something's wrong the way he's acting. He didn't realize, but they detected something amiss. They got him treatment right away. They had to administer Narcan to him. He could have died. It is so dangerous and so powerful. Now, I mentioned earlier the different ways that, this is getting into our community. I've told you the path, right? It's, all these smuggling routes. But one of the other things we're noticing is, it doesn't, that the people I see in court, and I see them on a weekly basis now, that have been charged and we're prosecuting for distribution of drugs or possession of drugs. Most of what we do is still possession of drugs, right? They don't, they're not the kind of people that we were prosecuting even 10 years ago, They're people that come from all walks of life. I've seen teachers, elementary school teachers, nurses, real estate agents, lawyers. I mean, you name it, they're getting involved with these drugs. And how is that? Well, it's the opiates. It's so many cases, the people we find with drug addictions now and are using the heroin got there legitimately. They got there because they got a prescription for some sort of legitimate medical problem they were having, and they were given a synthetic opioid by their healthcare provider. They happen to get addicted to those. And sometimes people with chronic pain, sometimes even people not with chronic pain. But, everybody's brain chemistry is a little different, and it's just like with alcohol, any kind of substance abuse where people get addicted, some people are more prone to that than others. So, you could have some people go out, binge drink, and then they stop, and they never have a problem, and then some people get addicted to the alcohol. Same thing with opiates, most people, they go to a medical provider, they get their opiates prescribed, they take their opiates the way they're supposed to take them, then they stop taking them, and they're fine. Other people's brain chemistry is a little bit different, and before they can stop taking those drugs, they find themselves addicted. So when they go back to the doctor, hey, I need a little more. They get a little more. Eventually, the healthcare provider says, no more, right? So then they go and they find another healthcare provider. Maybe they have to cover up the fact they've been to the first healthcare provider, right? And then the situation starts snowballing. And before you know it, that individual then, because he or she can't get any more drugs from a healthcare provider and get a legitimate prescription, is either forging drug prescriptions, we've seen a lot of that, or they're buying drugs off the street. And eventually, that addiction is just so powerful, it just drives people to desperation, and they'll be buying drugs just like any other drug addict, So this is and there aren't a lot of resources in the community to deal with that. So when we wind up dealing with it on my side of the house or my side of the business, we're really kind of at the end of the line, and that's when things have gotten really bad for that individual, and that's when we're scrambling to try to find whatever kind of resources are available. But a very, very big problem. I have spoken to so many parents. I have friends of mine. I spent a career in the Marine Corps. I graduated high school in 1974 and enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I retired in 1998. Became a lawyer after I retired. I tell people I never spent a day as a Marine, as a lawyer, so as a real Marine. Have any military veterans here? What service, sir?
Air Force.
Air Force, okay.
Army.
Army, get everybody covered.
Marine Corps.
All right. I used to, one of the many jobs I had in my many years in the Marine Corps, I used to teach at a joint school down in Norfolk. We'd go down there and teach these guys from all the different services and senior civilians. And people would ask, say, you Marines, it's like you always go, hoorah, hoorah, what is that? What is that? And I said, well, every service has that. It's like in the Marine Corps, it's hoorah, right? In the Army, it's hooah, right? Navy, especially Navy special ops guys, it's hoo-yah. And I said, and then the Air Force was like, hey dudes, how's it going? Anyway. But anyway, I had buddies in the Marine Corps. I've seen guys who I served many decades with, knew their children and have seen some of those children, unfortunately, in our courtrooms charged with heroin possession and addicted to drugs, And one of the hardest things is when you're dealing with parents who, are at their wits' end because they have their children. They're raising their grandchildren now. Good friend of mine, raising his grandchildren because his daughter is addicted to heroin. She was a elementary school teacher, had gotten clean, had spent a few years clean, wound up getting back on it. It is just a terribly insidious situation. And it is very hard. You talk to parents and people feel isolated. And this is kind of my public service pitch. If you're dealing with anything like that, if you know anybody who's dealing with that, the best thing people can do, families can do, is to reach out. There is a lot of support in the community, be it your church, social services groups, just get on the internet. Don't feel alone, because it is very isolating. It's embarrassing. You're fearful for your child. I've had this conversation over and over and over again with so many families, so many parents who are like I say, are just at their wits' end because they're so fearful for their children who are addicted to drugs. And it's, so the community it's starting to try to pull together to find ways to deal with that. So if you know of anybody who's dealing with it, I'd ask you just encourage them to reach out, be open about it, find people who can help, because there's a lot of organizations out there, because it is so sad to see people, they're starting out in life and they're getting addicted to these drugs. And, we can't prosecute our way out of it. We can't arrest our way out of it. We can arrest somebody, we can put them in jail, they could sit there for a while, they could get over the immediate crisis for the drugs. But I will tell you this, the most dangerous time we have seen with drug addicts is after they've been incarcerated for a few months, they get the drugs out of their system, and then they get back out on the street and they go back to using drugs, and they go back to the same level they were using it at before they got arrested. And they don't have that tolerance, and then they become victims. So We are struggling with it just like every place else. So what you see in the news about these places, Ohio, wherever, and the problem with the heroin, it may not be as evident here in this community, but I will tell you, it is something we're struggling with very mightily on a regular basis to try to deal with. Other kinds of crimes, we get a lot of theft crimes, retail theft rings, because we have Interstate 95 running right through the county. So we get, it's not uncommon to have cases where we have people coming down, they're hitting all the big box stores, and we will often find that the officers will often, when they search the car, they get a search warrant, look in their smartphones, and they'll see if their target of choice is Target or Walmart or Best Buy, you'll see all the places in their telephone where they've highlighted all the places they've been, just going from store to store to store in 3 or 4 states, right down the interstate. So we get a lot of those cases. My boss's policy is that we vigorously prosecute those retail theft cases when we, particularly when we see that these are people who are making a living doing it, we've all tell our kids the same thing. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal in life, right? Be nice to people, right? If you can do those things, you're going to be pretty successful in life, right? And that probably we could all sit down, and although the message if we all have kids, and we've probably all given our kids, is a little bit different, but those are probably kind of the big things, right? But young people do stupid things. So we get a lot of cases where young people go into a store and they'll take something and they won't pay for it, they'll get caught. That's a much different situation. We approach that much differently, obviously, than when we're dealing with people who are making their living stealing, Organized theft. It is incredible to see sometimes when our guys will catch somebody, a store will catch somebody stealing. Deputies will come, they'll respond, they'll be talking to this person, they'll get a search warrant, go out, and they'll get inside their car, and although maybe what they tried to steal was $300-400 worth of stuff from that particular store, say from that Target right up there at Stafford Marketplace, what they find in the car is $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 worth of stolen merchandise. These are people who are professionals, so we get a fair amount of that. We get a lot of trafficking in cigarettes. This is a kind of an interesting thing. Cigarette smuggling. It has become extremely lucrative. People will come to Virginia, purchase cartons of cigarettes legally, then take them up to New York, New Jersey, some of the states that have these extraordinary tax structures on cigarettes. So you could buy a carton of cigarettes for, I don't know, 45, 50 bucks here in Virginia, and you can sell them. That same carton will cost, at retail, would cost about $150 up in New York City. So they'll take them up there and sell them to small stores and sell them to small street vendors, and maybe double their investment. So they pay 50 bucks for them here and take them up there and sell them for 100. Virginia has a rule that you can't buy any more than, I think it's 5 cases of cigarettes, 5 cartons of cigarettes a day, right? Unless you're a retailer, and then you have a larger number you can get, right? So what these guys do is these rings will come down, and usually these guys will work in 2s and 3s and sometimes 4 of them. Come down in the same car, and they'll come down the highway, and they'll pull off, and they'll and they'll hit a bunch of stores. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll have gift cards, and they'll just go into like a supermarket, clear out a rack full of gift cards. Never take them to the register to energize them. They'll just put them in their pockets. And then they'll go to their car and they'll encode them with stolen credit card numbers. Because when your stuff gets stolen, when you read about a data breach, like all of a sudden you get an envelope from Chase Manhattan, right? All of a sudden they're sending you a new credit card, and they go, oh, your credit card was breached. Here's your new credit card. Now your life's upside down, right? Because you got to remember all the places, all the bills you have getting paid on your credit card. You got to call them and update, right? Long before you ever even know that your data was breached, it's been sold most likely to somebody somewhere in the world. It gets sold over the internet. Again, the dark internet, right? They go out there They sell these numbers, broker these numbers after these massive data breaches. So these guys will go and they'll buy blocks of numbers, and with a very inexpensive encoder that they use right in the car, they'll just, as soon as that, I mean, they'll be on the wireless, or they'll go through the phone system, they'll buy their stolen credit card information, and then they'll just encode it right off their laptop onto these gift cards. And then they go in and they use the gift cards to make their purchases. And when they get to the register, it just comes up like it's a gift card, even though it's stolen credit card information. Technology is a fabulous thing, but technology makes us incredibly vulnerable. And we see all those sorts of things. And we have had cigarette trafficking cases where, well, the ATF guys are telling us now that a tractor trailer loaded with cigarettes going from Virginia to New York City, when it gets to New York City, will give the smugglers a profit of approximately $1 million. A full tractor trailer, 1 million. One trailer load of otherwise legal cigarettes. Now, they're not legal up there, right? Because they don't have New York State, New York City tax stamps on them. But they were legal when they first got sold down here. We've had cases where people have taken that and funneled that money overseas. We think probably to terrorist operations. We've been peripherally involved in that. That hasn't been our case, but they just happen to travel through Stafford on 95, and the federal authorities got involved with that. DUIs, we have a lot of DUIs, sadly. Very, very dangerous crime. We have a distressingly large number. We have had just in the 16, 17 years I've been here, a distressingly large number of DUI manslaughter cases where innocent people have been killed by DUI drivers. Where you've got 95, a lot of drunk drivers out there, and our main roads as well. We got a lot of these state highways, and people drink and they get out there and they drive. And I will tell you, if you're behind somebody and they're weaving, 11 o'clock at night, call the police. You might be saving that person's life. Certainly you could be saving an innocent person's life. You might be saving that driver's life and the life of anybody in that person's car. Very, very sad cases that I've prosecuted. Young people, old people, families, just, it's very interesting with DUIs. The DUI law is, and we always tell our newer prosecutors when we bring them into the office, it's one of the most procedurally complex crimes we prosecute, because there's so many different statutes that cover it. There's so many different procedural hurdles to get the different evidence in, and it's fascinatingly complex law. So there's a few of us who specialize in doing those DUI cases. And one of the things, and we have 2 days every month, the first 2 Tuesdays of each month, down in our general district court, where we have our forensic docket, where we bring in, on each of those Tuesdays, we bring in our scientists from the Department of Forensic Science, our chemists, our forensic toxicologists, and they testify to the court as to the effects of the alcohol that we're seeing in that particular case, and they relate it to the details of that particular DUI case. And one of the things that we've learned is that although 0.08 is you'll hear people refer to it as the legal limit in Virginia. 0.08 is only part of the story. Part of our DUI law is if you're operating a motor vehicle at a 0.08 or above, you are guilty of DUI. But you can be guilty of DUI below an 0.8 as well. So it's not like if you're sitting in a bar and you have a couple glasses of wine and you blow into one of these little portable breathalyzers that you can buy inexpensively now, and you go, oh, I'm an 0.6, I'm safe to drive. That's not necessarily true. I've convicted people at 0.6, 0.5, 0.7, depending on the facts of the case. One of the things the scientists now talk about, and the National Transportation Safety Board, right, that big federal board that looks into major crashes, they look into dangerous things on the highways and all that sort of thing. They are now recommending that the maximum legal limit for operating a motor vehicle in all the states should be, based on current medical science, a .05, not a .08. I talked to older lawyers, I'm old enough, but you know, these guys even older than me out here, and they go, yeah, I remember back when it was a 1.6. You know, 1.6, you could barely stand up. So now it's an .08. But the scientists, the medical community is urging the government to, the states, to drop it to a .05, because it's at .05 where all those skills you need to be able to safely operate a motor vehicle start to become impaired, okay? And there is one state that's actually done that, Utah, about 4 months ago. They changed theirs to a .05, okay? They're the only state right now that I'm aware of, all right? Now, one of the biggest groups that you know, goes crazy, right, and lobbies against that is the hospitality industry, right? Because where do restaurants get most of their money from? It's liquor sales, right? I mean, if you ever want an interesting study, take a look at the business model for restaurants, and you'll find that the margin, the profit margin on the food they serve, unless you're one of these really uber trendy restaurants in New York or something, or Los Angeles or somewhere, you know, where you know, people will pay $250 for a snail's head or something, right? You know, for most real people, when we go out and eat, the profit margin's very, very low. It's the liquor sales that help bring in the, you know, bring in the profit for the restaurants. So obviously, if you're running a restaurant, you get pretty nervous if you hear people talking about dropping the BAC level down to an 05, right? Because if I told you today, hey, guess what, guys? Starting tomorrow night, the new level, maximum level is an 05 in Virginia. You gonna have that glass of wine when you go out tomorrow night? Maybe not. You're certainly not gonna have that second glass of wine, right? So, you know, we understand that, you know, economics are a really big part of this whole issue. But eventually, I think the science will become overwhelming. States, as they suffer, sadly, big tragedies and ugly, ugly cases, it will make new law, and you'll start to see that law change. But there's a lot of interesting things, and I'll tell you just this one very I think it's kind of an interesting anecdote that illustrates the problem. Once a year we go down, the prosecutors, and we have a conference where we get our professional education credits. Every year we have to get a certain number of credits to keep our license current with the state bar. And so our statewide association of prosecutors puts on a 3-day conference. We go down to Virginia Beach, tough place to go in the middle of summer, I know, but we do it because we have to. And one of the things they do is the Department of Forensic Science comes and they set up the intoxilizer machine, right? The thing you blow into to see what your BAC is. And they set it up at the hospitality suite. And, you know, so you got liquor being served there. And so then you get all these smart scientists, and they tell you, hey, they do this particularly with a lot of our younger prosecutors, you know, say, hey, if you're going to be drinking tonight, after you have a couple of drinks, come in and blow into the machine, then go back, and then in a couple more hours, if you're going to keep drinking, come back, and we'll do that throughout the night so you can see what these different BAC levels mean, right? And one of the ladies who runs the lab down in Richmond was telling me not long ago, she said that she has had for years now, she has this same experience. She'll get these prosecutors will come up to the table, and she'll ask them, how many drinks have you had? And typically they'll say 2, because that seems to be the answer you always give when somebody asks you how much you've been drinking, right? At least that's what they always tell the officers. 2, yeah. 1, 3, nah, okay, whatever. And I say, usually, you know, she'll tell them, come up after a couple of drinks. And she always asks them before they blow into the machine, do you feel like you would be safe to drive right now? And almost always, the answer is the same. So, you know, I wouldn't trust myself driving right now. I can feel the effects of the alcohol, and I wouldn't trust myself to drive. They blow in the machine, they're usually about an 05, an 06. They come back in a couple of hours, and she asks them, and they've been drinking, and she says, how do you feel? Do you think you'd feel safe to drive? And in most cases, they go, yeah, I think I could drive safely. I feel pretty good. And now they're a 1.0, a 1.1, a 1.2. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to embarrass any of my colleagues, okay? But what it shows is your judgment goes out the window, right? You have a little bit of alcohol and you feel it and you go, I don't feel like I'm safe to drive, right? You have a little bit more and you're thinking you're the best driver that the world's ever seen, right? I mean, I spent some time in the Marine Corps as a fighter pilot, so I know my driving skills are great, even at my age, right? Except I keep running over things in the parking lot, curves, I don't know. But, you know, so it's a big issue for us. And all I can tell you is that my boss, one of the things that is a guiding philosophy for us is we prosecute DUI cases very aggressively. We don't, you know, we recognize that any person can find themselves, you know, charged with a DUI. And it is certainly a situation where most people, most adults in our country, especially of a certain age, would say it's a there but for the grace of God go I kind of situation, right? If you haven't been charged with a DUI, most people who drink will say to themselves, I certainly could have been on some occasion. So we understand that. And you get this phenomena that some people will refer to as the wedding party DUI, right? You're out at the wedding party, you had that extra glass of wine, you didn't realize you're a little bit under the influence, and you get stopped. We treat the first-time DUIs pretty much, if there's nothing aggravating about it, which means the person was cooperative with the police officer, did what he or she was supposed to do, which is submit to the alcohol test and got tested and, you know, was otherwise reasonable on the side of the road with the officer. We treat it with suspended jail time, a standard fine, and then the legislature requires them to go to the alcohol safety program, and then if they want to get a restricted license, they have to have an ignition interlock that they have to blow into. You have to do that for a few months. So it's a pretty stiff penalty already. But we typically don't seek to put anybody in jail for that first DUI. Because, you know, it happens, right? It doesn't make people bad. It just means they had a little lapse of judgment and sometimes didn't even know they were having that lapse of judgment on that particular evening. Things change drastically, however, after that first time. Come back in on a DUI second or a subsequent, and we are very, very, we are very aggressive in our prosecution of those cases because of the community safety issue. And our attitude is that if, you know, if you've, after you've had one DUI, you just should never have another one. We hear all the time, and it's sad, a lot of sad cases. I've heard in sentencings all the time. Dawn, who sat in court, I see her in court all the time. In addition to helping run the office for Kathy Stearns, she's also in court doing dockets as well. And we hear it all the time. My client's got a drinking problem. She's an alcoholic. He's an alcoholic. And I always stand up and say the same thing. We haven't criminalized being an alcoholic. That's not why they're here. They're here because of the decision to drive a vehicle after they were drinking, right? 4, 5, 6,000 pound weapon hurtling down the road. I've told my 3 sons this, you know, who are all driving and adults now. You look at that massive car you're climbing into, it feels so safe, it feels so secure. I mean, my big old honking SUV, right? This thing is tough, right? Take a look at what is connecting you to the earth. A few square inches of rubber. That's it. It's not that car, right? It's 4 tires. 4 tires and, you know, 4 inches by 4 inches or, you know, somewhere about there, right? 16 square inches of rubber on each tire. That's it. And when that loses traction, I don't care what kind of vehicle you're in, bad things are going to happen. And so we figure if somebody didn't get the lesson, if they didn't figure it out after their first DUI, it's time to start helping them figure it out. And in Virginia, if you get your third DUI is a felony. Once you've been convicted of a felony, everyone after that's a felony. Now, you good people are sitting here probably going, yeah, how many people keep doing it, right? Way too many. Way too many. I have prosecuted people with 6 and 7 DUI convictions. I've beat my head against the table with the judge. Judge, how many times are we going to do this? You know? Felony DUI, you can get up to 5 years in prison, all right? It's rare that anybody does, you know, but we try to get people locked up for a long time, because by the time we have somebody 2 and 3 and 4 times, you just think of the danger you're letting that person inflict on the rest of the community. Nobody here, none of you have asked to share the road tonight with a drunk driver, right? You're going to get in your cars and you're going to get on your 16 inches of rubber, right? Grabbing you to the road on each tire, and you're going to drive home, and you hope to get there safely. And you expect the police and the people in my office and the judges to help you get home safely by enforcing the laws, right? But the sad truth of the matter is every community, ours included, every single night of the week, 24/7, every day of the year, has drunk drivers out on the road who we never catch. We only catch a small number. And that means we have all been mixing it up on the roads with impaired drivers. And you think about it, and it should make you angry, right? Because you didn't sign up for that. I know I didn't. I expect to get home safely. I don't like the idea that I never agreed to get out on the road with somebody who's drunk, but they're out there. So, you know, that's something that drives us in my office in a very, very real way, and that we really focus on and prosecute very strongly. Okay, let me just, one other thing I did want to mention, kind of our guiding philosophy. This is something, you know, it's kind of a bedrock thing for my boss, and that's fairness in how we do our job. Procedural fairness, to make sure that we as prosecutors play by the rules. There's a lot of rules that we have to follow as prosecutors, right? And that's a good thing, because none of us want to live in a society where the people don't have to follow rules, right? We don't want to be the subject to, you know, people capriciously deciding things about our lives without the protection of rules. So we don't get to change the rules when we're prosecuting somebody who we think's violated the law, okay? We spend a lot of time looking at every case that we're going to prosecute to convince ourselves beyond any doubt that this person has done what we're saying they did. If we don't, you know, if we have a doubt about whether or not the person is charged with a crime, that they've actually done what they're charged with, tie goes to the runner every time. Every time. We don't prosecute that case, okay? And the reason for that is because, you know, as a prosecutor, we don't, I can't speak about federal prosecutors. I think they have maybe a little bit of a different system. Maybe they got a little bit of a scorecard sometimes, and because I know they're afraid to lose a case. At the state system, and particularly in our office, what I always tell our younger prosecutors, hey, you're going to lose cases. You're going to lose cases because you just didn't have enough experience, or you weren't prepared enough, or because the evidence we had, you know, it just wasn't enough to convince the judge or every one of those jurors. And that's okay, because that's how this system has to work. If we don't have that kind of system, we don't have any system at all. And one of the biggest fears, you know, for prosecutors is the fear that you would ever put somebody, you know, convict somebody of something they didn't do. Because you can't imagine anything worse in the world than to be convicted of a crime that you didn't commit, you know? So we spend a lot of time in all our cases looking beyond just the evidence we're going to get to present in court, because there are so many procedural rules. It is often the case there's a lot more evidence we have that we just can't, or information that doesn't rise to the level of evidence that we can't put in front of a jury or can't put in front of the judge. And, you know, that's how our system's designed, and it's designed for a very important reason. And my boss is huge about that. It's a huge issue with us, with our law enforcement officers. I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn and Queens, New York, and I will tell you, law enforcement up there occasionally has a different view of the truth than what I do, you know? And my older sister is a prosecutor up in New York. And she says it drives them crazy in her office because she'll hear the police officers joking and talking, oh yeah, I got a court case tomorrow, I gotta go up and do a little testifying or perjumony. Now hopefully they're joking, but you know, this idea that somehow it's not so wrong for the law enforcement officer to help the case along a little bit up on the stand. Let me tell you, when she tells me stuff like that, it always makes me happy I'm from New York, like 300 miles from New York, and here in Virginia. I came here through the military. Fairness is a bedrock part of what we do. If, you know, I always say I love being a prosecutor because I feel like I get to go into court every day and wear a white hat, you know? But I don't get to wear the white hat if I'm not playing fair and square. I'm not wearing the white hat if I'm hiding evidence, if I'm shaping evidence, shading evidence, if I'm not turning everything I have over to the defense lawyer and saying, you need to come to my office. I want you to see what I got on your guy, okay? Look at my file. Take notes. I got nothing to hide because I'm the government. I do a job where my office, we're the only people that are allowed to take somebody's freedom away. None of you guys get to do that. If you take somebody's freedom away, I prosecute you for that, right? It's abduction. But I get to stand there in court and maybe ask people like you someday, if you're on a jury, take this woman's freedom away. Take this man's freedom away. Say he committed this crime. Find him guilty of committing the crime. That is a huge responsibility. And I don't get to wear the white hat as a prosecutor if I'm not making sure every day I'm being fair and open with everything I've got. That's my boss's attitude. That's our attitude with everybody as they come into our office. It's one of our big interview points as we interview new potential prosecutors when we have openings. And we have a long discussion with them to make sure they understand that. And this is not about, it's not baseball. We're not the Nats, right? We're not trying to put W's. Nobody's keeping score. If I got prosecutors going into the courtroom, young prosecutors, and they never lose a case, I start looking at them a little more closely. Are you just taking cases that are you avoiding cases that you're afraid to try because you don't want to lose them? Are you doing what you need to do in the cases? Fair and open, and I just can't say that enough because that's a big deal for my boss. That's the thing that would get you fired in my office if we ever thought you weren't doing that. Same thing with our deputies. We got a great sheriff's department here. And in all the years I've been here, one of the pleasures is being able to put a deputy on the stand and watch him say, you know, I honestly can't testify to that, sir. I don't have a good enough recollection. I can't say for certain that that car went over the lane, you know. Because, you know, why'd you stop the car? I have in my notes he was weaving in his lane. What do you remember about it? Sir, to be honest with you, I'm sorry, I just don't have a good recollection, a good enough one to testify under oath. And they'll do that during trial. And sometimes you're sitting there going to yourself, oh, geez, okay. You know, case thrown out. But, you know, if you feel good because you know you got a guy who's honest. If we have a guy who, you know, if you ever had a guy you suspected wasn't being honest, I'm going to tell you, they've had a couple guys over in my many years here, not many, thankfully, but a handful that, you know, weren't entirely honest inside the department with their own bosses about things, you know. We hear about it, and my boss called over, talked to the sheriff, and said, hey, just so you know, what you do to the guy, you know, with that guy is your business, but you need to know he's of no use to us as a witness. It doesn't matter that he never lied in court. If we learn that he lied to his superiors on the job over there in the public safety building, or lied about anything, we can't use him as a witness. We will not use him as a witness in court. And at that point, of course, he's of no use to the sheriff's department because he can't do his job. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal, and it's a big deal. My boss always pushing us to make sure we're using the right kind of discretion when we're looking at cases and evaluating them. Young people do dumb things. Young people do dumb things. They're programmed to do dumb things. I did dumb things. Some of you ladies are really still young, so you probably have dumb things left to do. But this side of the room, except for this young lady over here, yeah, we've all done dumb things, right? I've raised 3 boys. I saw a lot of dumb things from those knuckleheads, right? So, we need to show discretion. We need to show discretion, and we appreciate the community's patience. Sometimes if we're doing a case and maybe you read something and you go, what the hell are they doing? They let this guy off, or they didn't, they should have really crushed this guy, All I can tell you is have patience with us, because we look at every case individually and we try to fit our approach to the case to be appropriate for the person we're dealing with, especially when we're dealing with young people. So I walked up here, hand you this, I'm looking at all you fine people, and what I didn't tell you is what I always tell juries when I start my closing argument: the most dangerous thing in the world is to put a captive audience in front of a lawyer and tell the lawyer to start talking. And I proved that tonight. So, I'd love to answer any questions you all